So I just watched Pakman talking to Mercedes and Liana, and it was a much better interview than the one he did with either Christina Hoff Sommers or Fox Day. And it raised some interesting points that I think I've got some things to talk to about and around. So I'm going to rewatch it, and I'm going to record my thoughts and reactions to the questions and comments that are made. I'm not going to intercut the video because then this will be hugely long, but yeah, I'll put the link in the low bar, so you should probably watch that first, and then come back here and let's talk about it. Speaking for myself, I don't really see Gamergate as having moved into these areas like science fiction and so forth, so much as Gamergate has a common cause with people in these other arenas, and so much as all of these little smaller battles are part of a much broader societal culture war. So it's not that surprising that Gamergate has broad alliances with these similar battles in other forms of media. As to why Gamergate has started to move into real world spaces, I think this is because it's been frustrated in online spaces, and by the media, with people blocking and people going on, the false narrative, the bad reputations, and so on, that really have no factual basis in reality. It becomes incredibly hard to reach out and talk to people. Whereas if you're meeting someone in meet space, you have to deal with a person. You can't deny their humanity. You can't block them. You're forced to treat them as a fellow human being and to discuss and talk with them. So I actually see that as a positive and hopeful thing, potentially, because hopefully it will force our enemies, so to speak, to acknowledge that we're human, to have to listen, at least to some degree. Now, the events at Calgary perhaps show that that's naive and wishful thinking on my part, but then it's also had a massive positive impact for Gamergate as a whole by showing that it's not Gamergate that is in control. It's not Gamergate that's using its authority or traditions or social power or anything to silence anybody. It's the other side. They are the ones in charge. They are the ones in power, and they're the ones wielding it to silence any dissenting view. And it's not even really a reactionary or contradictory view per se. It's just a different view, a view that is progressive in a different way. Or so yeah, I think that's been useful, and I hope people continue to move into real spaces, wear the t-shirts, talk about it with people, ask questions at panels, appear on panels. What's the point of a panel where there's no dissenting or alternative point of view and everyone just agrees with each other? That strikes me as rather boring, and as a really boring conversation to watch. So get people on panels to talk about this stuff, moderates and Gamergate proponents. How has Gamergate changed? It's become a community. It's no longer really just a hashtag. It's people who have come together, and people want to keep hold of that community and all the positive things that it's done and all the good friends that they've made. So that's kind of how it's changed. Gamergate's been successful. It's made quite a few changes. It's forced sites to bring in ethical policies. It's raised a lot of money for charity. It's done a lot of good, and people are kind of loath to let that traction go. The sci-fi thing has been going on for years. Convention issues have also been kind of going on for years, albeit bubbling along at a lower level. So those aren't really Gamergate things. It's just that we have this common cause over these issues, and that common cause isn't primarily ethics, though there are ethical issues surrounding the Hugo Awards and ethical issues surrounding who you bar and who you allow into conventions, but it's really more of a censorship issue, and that has been part of Gamergate since the very start. Has Gamergate been diluted? I don't know. I think it's expanded, but I don't think it has diluted exactly. The way people are saying about it diluting sounds like they're talking about what happened to Occupy, but I haven't seen the same thing happen. Gamergate has shed a lot of the trolls and so on as they've gotten bored and wandered on to other things, and that's good. Those hangers-on who aren't really part of it being kind of dispensed with, and leaving a core of genuinely motivated and thoughtful people. That's been a positive thing. But I haven't seen it split apart in the way Occupy did by insisting that everybody agree. That's what broke that up. That's what's diluted other protest movements. Has it become politicized? I think there's been a lot of attempts to politicize it. There's people argue over whether Milo is trying to kind of exploit Gamergate to his own advantage. I think he just smells a story, really. And yeah, he's on the right, and the right wing has gained a lot of ground with a lot of people who are ostensibly left libertarian within the movement. Why? Simply because they've been reporting more accurately and more fairly on Gamergate than the normal media. And you would think that would be something they wouldn't want to do to drive people to the right. And I think, as a leftist, I think that's unfortunate. I think it's potentially dangerous in the future, but I don't think that Gamergate has been overtly politicized. And I don't see the men's human rights movement as a political movement per se. I see it as a social movement, a kind of correcting influence. And yes, it has many of the same problems that feminism has. It's been making many of the same mistakes. But feminism is much more overtly a political movement. It exerts power through politics. But Gamergate isn't men's human rights. It just shares some common enemies in radical feminism. Well, we call it radical, but it's really mainstream feminism these days. But yeah, again, this is the shared enemies thing. Gamergate is not men's human rights. It just shares common cause over ethics. There's been lots of unethical reporting about the men's human rights movement, and there's been lots of unethical reporting about Gamergate and over censorship issues. So yeah, that's where the common ground is there. Is it becoming a protest? Partly, but I think it kind of always was. It's just the things to protest about have broadened as treatment of Gamergate has gotten worse, as treatment of the people in it has gotten worse, as these problems have gone on, and a lot of the politicization has come from the other side. I mean, you see Zoe Quinn going to government and at the same time insisting, "Oh, we're not Jack Thompson," you know. And you see similar sort of things happening with Anita Sarkeesian. They're making it political. So in order to continue to counter the toxic effect that these people are having on games, on media in general, on the internet in general, then you're gonna have to get political too. Um, Crossover, as Liana was talking about, is Gamergate just games? Well, no, because it's the nature of media these days that it's transmedia. So, Batman is a game, a comic, films, and all kinds of other properties. So it's kind of impossible to talk about one in isolation. And while journalistic ethics concerns are particular to journalism, there are ethical concerns in other arenas. And the grand common cause across all these transmedia is censorship, and you can see that in censorship of comic book covers, censorship of game content, people being silenced or drowned out or not even talked to in media, and so on. So there are commonalities. Yes, it adapts to different media, but properties and issues exist across all media. The nebulous nature of Gamergate has kind of been a problem since the beginning, but it's also been a huge benefit. Not having a rigid hierarchical structure has allowed Gamergate to be adaptive, to adjust to circumstances, to bring things on, to take things out, to cast people off, to bring people in. It's made it incredibly resilient, and not having any single figurehead who can be attacked for anything they've ever said taken out of context. We can carry on. We can keep going even when someone like Internet Aristocrat or King of Pole drops out. It doesn't matter. It's not a big issue because it's not about them. It's not about Sargon. It's not about me. It's not about Mercedes. It's its own thing. So who is and isn't Gamergate? Well, anyone who wants to be can be part of Gamergate, but that doesn't mean that all their views are part of Gamergate. I mean, what Gamergate is emergent from the actions and beliefs and the focus of the group, but what it definitely is a concern about ethics in games journalism, and now more broadly in journalism as a whole, because mainstream journalism has acted abominably with reference to Gamergate. It's just piled on in the smears without doing any even basic research. So that concern has expanded, and the censorship concern isn't just present in Gamergate; it's present everywhere else as well. So there's a lot to it. But who is Gamergate is anyone who wants to participate. So if there's people out there who don't like how they believe Gamergate is and how they believe Gamergate acts, the best way to change that is actually to get involved and to be the change you want to see. That's what I try to do. I don't necessarily succeed all the time or particularly well, but that's part of the reason I stay on board. So there needs to be a distinction, I guess. I mean, the interview that was alluded to was Vox Day's interview, and he is. There's no charitable way to put it. He's a bit of a cunt, and his views, while often somewhat misreported, are still pretty toxic as a whole. But I don't need to agree with Vox Day on his views about marital rape or homosexuality or anything else. As long as we agree that there are ethical problems in journalism and that everyone has a right to free expression, and we agree on that, we don't need to agree on anything else. And it doesn't mean that his views on homosexuality or marital rape have anything whatsoever to do with Gamergate, and it's kind of disingenuous to go after these views of his in an interview that's ostensibly supposed to be about Gamergate. It's irrelevant. If we were arguing about any of these things, I would be, metaphorically punching him in the dick over them, but we're not. We're talking about Gamergate, so, what are the things we do agree on? And that's what's important. Is what's going on a no true Scotsman fallacy? Well, no, because it's not no true Gamergater. Vox can be a Gamergater. It's just that these other views have nothing to do with Gamergate. So it's not no true Scotsman so much as, he's a Scotsman, but his views on things that have nothing to do with Scotland have nothing to do with Scotland and are irrelevant. So it's not really no true Scotsman. You can have multiple identities, so you can be a member of Gamergate and a sad puppy and a Democrat or Republican and a Christian or Muslim or atheist or whatever else. You can have multiple identities, so that's really not the thing. Talking about status, I've been in Gamergate since before it was Gamergate. I've been in the longer battle for 5+ years, but I don't see that position as granting me any kind of extra status, but rather as being a sort of tribal elder, someone in a position to educate, inform, and to speak from that educated and informed and considered position to other people, both inside and outside the movement. So I don't see it as status, but it is something that's valuable, and that's true of many other people. The question of radicalization is an interesting one, and I think I part ways with both panelists on this issue. Firstly, I don't see men's human rights activism as being particularly radical. Equality is not a particularly radical concept these days. The idea that it applies to men might be, but that's different to calling people radicals. That's that out of the way. To me, there are two major causes of radicalization in and around Gamergate. For Gamergaters themselves, a leading cause of radicalization is that there's been such a total lack of consideration and discussion of their point of view, and this creates an enormous amount of resentment and frustration. And when you don't have legitimate and useful ways to have your grievances addressed and redressed, then that's when you get radicalization, and that's when you get direct action, that's when you get the shift to protest, and so forth. So, possibly tastelessly, I think you could draw comparisons with what's going on currently in the US at time of recording. There's we're post Ferguson protests. So we've got riots in Baltimore now, and to my mind, a large part of the reason for these kind of physical, active, destructive protests is that these communities feel that they have no legitimate lines of redress. Voting doesn't make a difference. The police are not there to serve them. They don't feel the courts aren't serving their interests. So, what's left? And I think a similar kind of process has radicalized a great many people in Gamergate, in that they feel that the media will not listen to them, will not present their point of view. They're being ignored. They're being thrown out of conventions. And so you have to keep searching for new ways to be heard, to force people to listen to you, and that's potentially dangerous. I don't think it's dangerous at this point, but I would encourage any media people listening in, or anyone with media contacts, to keep this in mind, that the best way to diffuse this situation is to encourage discussion of Gamergate, and I mean Gamergate, not harassment, not any of these other issues that people keep trying to shoehorn into it, and make it about something else, but to encourage discussion of what Gamergate actually is. Talk to people, listen to people, understand that they're sincere, hear them out, and build bridges, create lines of communication. I think the other source of radicalization, and this one applies to both sides, is the blocking. It's well known in studies of extremist communities, whether it be religious cults or suicide bombers or so on, that once people are closed off and in echo chambers, that they tend to become more extreme in their point of view, and they tend to trend towards the most extreme point of view within their echo chamber. So on the anti-side, they create their own echo chamber for themselves, but because they are blocking everybody else, there's also much less communication with the other side. So neither side is hearing what the other side is saying. No discussion, no argument, and even if it's vociferous and a nasty argument, it's still better to have that conversation in any form, I feel, than to not have it at all. So that the block bots and those issues have not helped the situation at all. They've had the opposite effect. They've aggravated the situation. And as to going and looking at what people are saying, I mean, why would you go and stare into the abyss? I periodically try unblocking people to foster communication and have a productive discussion or argument, but each time they seem to be even more extreme and even less willing to listen. So it becomes increasingly a waste of my time to even try to communicate with the people on the other side. I stay around because I believe, I consider that I am a moderate within Gamergate, and that I value this communication. So that, again, that's another part of the reason I stick with it. I see that role as being a useful and essential one. When talking about both sides, in inverted commas, hurting people, I think it's important to acknowledge that no harassment has been directly linked to Gamergate. Now, whether that's just because that side's more technically able to avoid detection and has the good sense to be anonymous about it, well, that's up in the air. Whereas, on the other side, the anti-Gamergate people have not been shy or anonymous at all in the way that they've been harassing and going after people. They seem to be happy to put their name to it, and they seem able to get away with it. This is really a distraction. It's not what Gamergate is about. I've been talking to a woman called Carolyn Reinhardt, at least I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and we've kind of reached a stalling point because she wants me and anyone else from Gamergate that she talks to acknowledge and talk about the harassment as part of Gamergate. Well, it isn't. It's a distraction from Gamergate. It's a tactic that has been used to derail and distract from and override the discussion we want to have, which is about ethics and censorship and attendant issues around them. Harassment online is an important issue and one that probably should be discussed, but it has fuck all to do with Gamergate. It's entirely incidental. Gamergate might occasionally insult people directly, certainly make fun of them, shit post about them. That's all kind of the normal rough and tumble of the internet, as far as we are concerned. Some people on the other side might want to change that or see that as a bad thing, but that's what it is. On the opposite side, aggro, the anti-Gamergate side, has gone directly after people's livelihoods, their reputations, and so on, whereas Gamergate has only done such a thing in response to sites by going after advertisers and individuals who are hypocrites or are actually the cause of ethical or censorship concerns. Whereas the anti-Gamergate tends to go after people often for things said out of context, or that's that sort of thing. And aggro, like I've said, they do it much more directly. They're not shy about it. They see it as a legitimate tactic. I think Movie Bob said, there's no bad tactics. There's only bad targets, which implies that there's good targets for this kind of thing, like doxing and so on, which several aggro people have endorsed, and most Gamergate people don't endorse. Of course, there's disagreements over what constitutes doxing and whether information online that's publicly available, made available again elsewhere, is doxing or not. It's all kind of complex semantics. To take the two kind of extremes, I think a large part of this comes down to identity politics versus a non-culture, which are kind of extreme examples of broader streams in society. To ID politics proponents, identity, who you are, what you are, your race, your gender, all that is incredibly important. Whereas to a non-culture, and from my point of view, to anyone with any kind of grounding in logic, reason, critical thinking, these are completely unimportant. What matters is your argument. What matters is the truth. What matters is the facts. And I think that difference definitely aggravates the battle between the two sides, because aggro take everything personally, and Gamergate tend to not take anything personally, or to even consider that someone might take it personally, or if they do understand that people take it personally, they don't think it matters. And strictly from a logical and a rationalist point of view, they're absolutely right about that. I mean, the example of Anne Wheaton was brought up. So, okay, well, let's examine that. Why was she attacked? Because she reported on people being thrown out of the Calgary Expo for no good reason as a good thing. So what was the reaction? Lots of angry people trying to correct her, being outraged that she would celebrate people being censored and thrown out, and so on. How was it reported? It was reported as Gamergate harassing her. But if you actually went through her tweets, no, it was people angrily reacting, but they weren't harassing her, and she reported some things like obvious regurgitation of memes as though it was a serious death threat and so on. And so, quite rightly, in my opinion, she had the piss taken out of her, and she has the unfortunate situation of being attached to Will Wheaton, who is the biggest contradiction to his own dogma of don't be a dick as you'll ever find. So, you have to consider the why and the how and the actual content. Saying kind of, how do we end this? How are we satisfied? At what point can we say, we're done with this? I don't think is a particularly valid question. I think it's important to acknowledge that Gamergate has made or fueled or provoked real progress on the ethics issue. Certainly censorship to an extent, but not to such a big extent, unfortunately. But these issues are always going to be with us. There's always going to be a tension between what should be allowed, what should be okay to express, and what shouldn't. That's an ongoing conversation, and it's always going to be contextual to the time and place, and so that's never going to end. I welcome the fact that Gamergate has helped swing things back the other way. I mean, if you look at the reaction in the protein world scandal, I mean, them basically sticking up the middle finger to people and going the other way, rather than kowtowing to these kind of criticisms, has been hugely popular. And I think Gamergate has had some influence on that, even though it's really nothing to do with Gamergate. Just I think people are being emboldened by the fact that they see others, standing up to this zeitgeist of censoring and controlling and silencing everything. So that's always going to be going on across all media, and I welcome the fact that there's some pushback. But eventually, possibly, there might need to be some pushback the other way. So that's an ongoing conversation. The ethical journalism issue will never be settled either. I mean, look at mainstream media. There's all kinds of court decisions, laws, ombudsman, and others, kind of watching over mainstream media, and we still have problems like the Brian Williams scandal that was mentioned, and so on. And I think Gamergate has woken up a lot of people to the fact that there are deep problems in mainstream media as well, and it took reporting on an issue that they were directly involved in and that they understood, and seeing how inaccurate and bad that reporting was to really get engaged. And I hope people from Gamergate also continue to be engaged in trying to correct and encourage better practices in other media as well. So this is the new normal. We now have an effective countergroup or groups to work against the censorious activism on the other side, and it seems to be swaying public opinion. Even if they've heard terrible things about Gamergate. Perhaps we need some sort of ombudsman, some sort of industry-led watchdog, just like we have the voluntary rating system in computer games, that can deal with these issues, or at least provide another channel of recourse. I would love to see publishers and press working together to come up with some kind of universal ethical policy that applies to both sides. I mean, this was a real opportunity for the gaming press to deal with the pressures, the bribery, the extortion that they have had from some publishers, and they passed it by, and that's a missed opportunity, I think. But maybe publishers and press together can come up with a decent ethical policy and invest in some kind of body, even if it's a voluntary one, to watch over them. In the meantime, I think Gamergate will continue in one form or another, with people being much more cynical and observant of what goes on in the media around their industry. Again, the shift into the real world, the conventions and so on, is fueled by a desire to discuss these issues, and it comes about because of the intransigence and opposition that the media and the anti-Gamergate people have to even talking to the other side, and that's how we need to move it. I mean, ideally, the press should be watching itself. It shouldn't need people outside to go, hey, this is unethical, or hey, you've reported this wrong. It should, the press should be reporting on itself, keeping an eye on itself. But it doesn't, and therein lies the problem. Clono's beard and whiskers. I do not want to talk about Anita Sarkeesian, but I will. Her being in Time magazine, what the fuck is the point of an online poll about who you're going to put in the list if you're just going to put people in the list anyway? And yes, online polls are inaccurate, but you can bet both sides were trying to brigade it, and that she failed so utterly to have any kind of reasonable approval basis still has meaning. Has she been influential? Sure, yeah, she's been influential. The Black Plague was influential in Europe, and that wiped out, 1 in every 3 people. So I don't think influential is a good measure. And as Mercedes points out, there's problems with her, and as Liana pointed out, there's problems with her. For me, the big problem isn't so much that she's not a gamer, or even that she's a fraud, or because that's pretty much confirmed at this point. And I'm not just talking in terms of her background, but it's obvious she's not a gamer, and yet she's taken money from people under the pretense of being a gamer and to talk about games. But still, if she stood up and defended her point of view, or her supposed point of view is probably Macintosh's point of view, if she would debate it, if she would talk about it, if she would be on panels with people of opposing points of view, if anyone on the other side would do that, it would have a lot more respect. I mean, for fuck's sake, you can have Bill Nye having a conversation and discussion with someone from the Creation Institute, and the Creation Museum. Was it Ken Ham? I think it was Ken Ham. We can have that in a live televised debate over something as utterly moronic as the idea of a 6,000-year-old Earth. And people will take that seriously and will tune in and watch and everything. And Ken Ham, or whoever it was, I think it was him, will happily stand up and defend such a ridiculous point of view. And yet you can't get Anita Sarkeesian to to discuss it with anybody. You can't even have comments on the videos, nothing, right? We need discussion on these topics, and we need two sides on these topics, and they need to be reasonable people. And she's not that. So, if someone needs to take that step, it needs to become a discussion. I want it to be a discussion. I want people to listen to each other. I will happily consider people on the other side to be sincere. I want them to extend the same to me, and I want the facts to determine what we do and what's going on. That's where I'm at. I want discussion. I want people to be open to dissenting points of view. I try to be. I don't see why they can't. Where are things going to go? Where should they go? My conception is that things are already kind of headed there. The core of Gamergate, as much as that means anything, is definitely becoming a community, and it's generally speaking much more positive, despite misunderstandings. The in-person meetups are helping forge that community. There have been lots of positive things that have come out of Gamergate. I mean, not just the ethical changes to various sites or the charity donations, but things like Based Gamer, potentially very good. We've seen a number of new sites pop up. Personally, being a pervert, I'm rather excited by Lewd Gamer, because I think adult games deserve to be taken seriously and given the same kind of respect or disrespect, or to be held to the same standard as any other field of gaming. And so I'm excited to see that's come up. We've seen a shift away from the sites that have abused their positions to traffic and support for new ones. We've seen support for independent developers who are truly independent and not politicized. So I think we're already seeing things going in that direction, and I hope we see more of that. And that's the way I would like to see things go, in that Gamergate becomes a kind of unofficial watchdog until something more official comes along, and becomes a community of invested hobbyist fans who are boosters of things that they like as much as they are defenders of things that they like, and as much as they are attackers of people who threaten that. I would like to see it settle into a kind of more of a immune system role, I guess. An immune system for free expression, innovation, ethics, and all the rest of it. That's how I would like to see things go. And I see encouraging signs that is the way things are going, and that's another reason why I stick with it, because I want to be part of that, and I want to help people make games. I want to be involved in making games. I want to be involved in the broader nerd community, in a positive way. So that's a large part of why I stick with it, and that's how I am going to try and angle things. It's where I'm going to put my efforts in, and hopefully I'll be well enough to actually attend to the next real life meeting, because I want to meet some of these guys and give them a big hug, because they've looked out for me, and I owe them, if nothing else. But I also think, like I keep banging on, that we need to have actual discussions. We need to build bridges between the different sides. We need to get people talking to each other. They don't have to agree, but we need to get people talking. I would like to see the people proposing these opposite points of view. I would like to see them held to account. I would like to see their ideas examined without them resorting to insults or accusations of sexism, racism, or whatever else. That's not what's going on. It's ideas being criticized. It's ideas that want to be held to scrutiny, and all this other stuff just gets in the way of that, and it's incredibly frustrating. I would also like to see some more honest and accurate reporting, not just in games media, but in the mainstream media. I don't know where Mr. Pakman falls exactly on that axis, but this last interview, especially coming after what I felt were poor interviews of Mrs. Summers and Mr. Day, this interview was a good one. Maybe boobs intimidate him. Maybe that's the trick. Have your tits out, and Pakman will behave himself. Maybe that's how it works. I don't know. Anyway, I thought that was a really good interview, and that's why I wanted to kind of respond to a lot of the points that are on there. I hope you listened all the way through, and I made some kind of sense. And have a great day. Peace out.